Just call me Eddie here, back with another project video, and I bought a 2011 Chevy Colorado with a 3.7 L5 in it. And I didn't buy it from the auction either. I bought it from a loyal customer of mine who buys and sells vehicles. And this one he bought with thinking it had a good transmission in it, and he drove it and it didn't have a very good transmission in it. So he brought it to me to fix, and he had too much money in it to just put a new transmission in it or have the one rebuilt in it. So now I own it, and we're going to take it apart today. We're going to drive it first of all, and then we're going to take it apart and see exactly what's wrong with this transmission and how it drives before I take it apart, and see what's causing that inside the transmission. This is a very common GM transmission. It's a 4-speed automatic. You might have heard of it. It's called a 4L60E. If you want to know more about that specific transmission, I have a video on my other channel, Transmissions America, John and Eddie. And on that channel, I have a specific video all about the problems that happen in the 4L60E and how we fix them. In this video, it's going to be more about the truck itself, the Chevy Colorado, and what's exactly wrong with it. And we're just going to take the transmission apart, and you're going to see the inside of a 4L60E. So now that I own this vehicle, let's go ahead and take it for a drive and see why it ended up at my shop. All right, we're going to drive this thing real quick. The scanner on it, my new scanner here, and we're just going to see what happens when we drive it, try to diagnose the transmission here. We know it's got a transmission problem because I bought it for really cheap, so I wouldn't think I bought it for cheap for no reason. Got a nice 1-2 shift there. Oh, not good. No third gear. Oh, not good. No third gear. That's not good. Okay, well, we're just going to pull a U-turn here. Alright, illegal U-turn there. We're going right back to the shop here in second gear because we don't have any third gear. Probably burnt up third gear clutch or 3/4 clutch on this thing. We're gonna take it out, take it apart, and see what's wrong with it, order parts, and see if we can get it fixed. We're gonna go ahead, we're gonna yank this transmission out, see what's wrong with it. We got a clean bench over here ready to take it apart. All right, so we're gonna have to start with probably the subframe and the T-case, and we're gonna get that out the way first, and then we're gonna move on to the bell housing bolts, torque converter bolts, and then we should be ready to come out. To get the torque converter bolts out, we're probably going to have to either go through here, which isn't that big of a deal. Before doing any other work, I'm going to go ahead and drain the transmission pan, and while we're at it, we're going to see any debris in the transmission pan that might have a sign of what's going on inside before we even get the transmission out. So we're going to be dropping the transmission pan down. I'm doing it slowly because there's a lot of fluid still in there. We're going to drain the fluid out, and you can see all the debris once you do, and we can get a good idea of what's going on. I think this thing might have some torque converter clutch failure and might have some burnt up clutch packs. All right. So once you have everything disconnected, you have all the bell housing bolts out, T-case off, subframe and drive shafts out the way, transmission kind of comes right down. Still got to wiggle it out a little bit. It's a little bit of a process. We get it on the bench and we're going to go ahead and get it disassembled. And when you take the torque converter out on a 4L60, you may notice you might have some special bolts holding the bell housing on. Have no fear, you can buy a bit for this and it's sometimes like 40 bucks, but sometimes, most of the time it's like 30 bucks. Anyways, once we get the bell housing off, we can lay it on its side to get the pan and the valve body off. 13mm bolts on the pan, and I had most of them off when I took it off in the vehicle. Now once we get the pan off, we can get a good look at all the carnage inside that pan. A lot of clutch debris, expecting some burnt clutches inside this thing. I would disconnect the solenoids. There's 5 solenoids, 2 shift solenoids, an EPC, and 2 TCC solenoids. One of them is attached to the wiring harness, and you gotta unbolt it. And now most of the valve body bolts are 10mm and 8mm. Sometimes you'll see a 13mm randomly on a GM valve body. And this is also the 1-2 accumulator over here, which controls the 1-2 shift. Get the valve body off and we drop some check balls on the bench. Don't worry, we're going to find those, make sure they're back in the right location in the next video when we do the rebuild. Now to get the pump out, 13mm bolts on the front of the pump, and you can get a slide hammer and torque it in there and see if you can get it out. You can also just use a pry bar and pry against the case and the pump will come out with no damage to it. Then we take the reverse and 3/4 drum out of it. Those don't always come out as easy, especially if that band locks up around it. There's the 2/4 band, it's burnt up. Now we move to the front planet. It has a snap ring holding it to the output shaft. The planet comes out, then the sun gear comes out, and then the rear sun shell comes out afterwards. Now we have to get the rear sprag assembly out. It has a snap ring holding it to the case, that big yellow thing going around. Takes a little bit of technique to get it out. A little bit of prying with the small screwdriver, then you get down in there and you can grab it and yank it right out of there. Next is the sprag race, which sits on the inside of the sprag. You get that out so you can get a slide hammer in there and get the sprag out because it's a little tight with the anti-rattle clip holding it in tight to the case. Just a little bit of snap ring, get out of there, and then you can push the output shaft in from the back of the case and it'll push the sprag out of there and then you can grab it right out. And now we pull a rear planet out of there, and there's the anti-rattle clip here that I was talking about holding that sprag in there. Now all we have left is the output shaft and rear planet ring gear, and then we take the part pawl loose so we can get the low reverse piston out of there. We take our special tool and we get the retaining spring loose with the snap ring holding the retaining spring in there. Once we do that, we can apply some air to the piston and it'll push right out of there. It's a little bit tough to grab. Once you grab it, here. Sometimes you might need some needle nose pliers to get that out. Now the last thing I got to get out is this 2/4 servo, which actuates the band. It's the band servo, and I use a big pair of C clamps, compress it down like that, and then I get my pry bar screwdriver in there and get it just behind that snap ring, pry that snap ring out. Once you do that, you can just release the C clamp, and then you got to pry it out a little bit with the screwdriver some more, and you might have to take that O-ring out, cut it, and take it out as well. Now let's see what's actually wrong with this thing. We have the 3/4 drum here. We had no third gear. This is the third gear clutch, and as you see, there is no friction material left at all on these third gear clutch frictions. And that was the main problem with this transmission, especially when we were driving it. We didn't have any third gear, and that's where that problem lies right there. Now in the next video, I have plenty of clutches here to replace and plenty of parts to put in to repair this thing and get it where it'll drive again. Other things that were wrong with this transmission is we had a blown out torque converter. And when a torque converter blows out, it stops up the filter and it can cause some of these other problems that's going on. And that's why we're going through the entire transmission instead of just fixing one burnt up clutch pack and putting it back together. If you're going to take these things apart, do them all at once. That way you don't have to take them back out again. In my next video, we're going to be putting this transmission back together. We're going to be putting all the new parts in it. And hopefully we'll have time to install it in that same video. Until that point, though, you can go check me out on Facebook and Instagram, where you can DM me for a free t-shirt or DM me any questions you have. Other than that, I'll be coming to other platforms soon, so just stay tuned, hit that subscribe button for me, and go ahead and like this video if you learned anything. Until next time, folks, whatever you're doing, however you're doing it, make sure you stay dirty doing it, and you can just call me Eddie.